3 hours of sustained fire. That's how long Iran kept the skies over central Israel lit with hypersonic warheads, while American officials were still claiming a 90% reduction in Iranian capability. I'm Kenzo Shimada, and what I witnessed last night on March 10th wasn't the collapse of Iran's arsenal. It was the unveiling of a strategy that every Western analyst completely missed. But here's what nobody's telling you. The missiles that broke through weren't just bigger. They were smarter, clustered, and deliberately timed to exploit a weakness that Israel's multi-billion-dollar defense network never saw coming. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why the official narrative and the reality on the ground are two completely different wars. Let me take you back to exactly 11:47 p.m. local time, March 10th. I was monitoring live feeds from 3 separate sources when the first wave designation came through. Operation True Promise 4, Wave 37. The IRGC wasn't hiding anymore. They published the strike confirmation within minutes, listing every target. Hayela satellite relay south of Tel Aviv, military positions in Be'er Yaakov, sites across West Jerusalem, Haifa's northern corridor, even American installations in Iraqi Kurdistan and the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. But what caught my attention wasn't the target list. It was the weapon systems they deployed simultaneously. Fatah hypersonic missiles reaching Mach 15 on re-entry. Khorramshahr ballistic missiles carrying over 1,500 kilograms of explosives. And here's the part that changes everything. Cluster munitions breaking into dozens of sub-munitions mid-flight, scattering across a 10-kilometer radius before any interceptor could engage them individually. One missile becomes 20 independent threats. Think about that for a second. Now, I need you to understand something critical about cluster warheads, because this is where Israel's defensive math completely falls apart. The Arrow system, David's Sling, Iron Dome, they're all engineered to track and destroy a single re-entry vehicle on a calculable trajectory. That's the foundation of layered air defense: detect, track, intercept. But a cluster warhead doesn't play by those rules. It fragments at altitude, releasing 20 to 24 bomblets, each carrying several kilograms of high explosives spreading across kilometers of airspace. If the interceptor reaches the missile before it disperses, you're fine. But if that warhead separates even 1 second early, you're not shooting at one target anymore. You're watching 24 independent projectiles rain down, and your defense network wasn't built to handle that kind of saturation. The evidence is already on the ground. In Yehud, just outside Tel Aviv, 2 construction workers were killed by sub-munitions from a single cluster-armed missile. They were outdoors, never reached a shelter. First responders near Beit Shemesh described arriving at multiple overlapping blast scenes, treating casualties across a scattered impact zone. That's not one missile getting through. That's one missile doing the work of 20. But wait, because there's a pattern here that nobody in Washington wants to admit. 4 days before Wave 37, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood in front of cameras and declared that Iranian strikes had dropped by 90%. President Trump followed up on March 10th, claiming over 5,000 targets destroyed and 80 to 90% of Iran's launchers eliminated. Israeli broadcaster Channel 11 reported the daily missile count falling from 90 on day 1 to 65 on day 2, down to 25 by day 3, then 20 by day 4. The narrative was clear. Iran was running out of missiles. The campaign was working. Escalation dominance was ours. Except none of that explained what I was watching unfold in real time. Because while the volume of launches dropped, the missiles themselves got exponentially more dangerous with each successive wave. Iran wasn't depleting its arsenal, it was sequencing it. Volume first to saturate defenses and expose detection gaps. Heavy warheads and hypersonics later into a degraded detection environment that could no longer see them coming. Wave 37 was the endpoint of that sequence. 3 continuous hours, 5 different missile systems, cluster munitions across central Israel. Multiple theaters hit simultaneously. That's not collapse. That's calculated escalation. And here's where it gets worse. On March 11th, the New York Times published satellite analysis identifying at least 17 American military facilities damaged by Iranian strikes across the Gulf region. 11 of those are U.S. military installations: Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salam in Kuwait, 5th Fleet HQ in Bahrain. Several were struck more than once. Satellite images showed structural damage to radomes, satellite dishes, and support structures immediately adjacent to THAAD TPY-2 radar systems, the tracking radars that coordinate ballistic missile interception across the entire region. Senior U.S. defense officials told the Times that Iran adapted its targeting strategy to focus specifically on American vulnerabilities. The interceptors and air defense systems meant to protect U.S. forces. And here's the phrase that should alarm everyone. Iran's ability to damage these facilities defied expectations in the Trump administration. That's not neutral language. Defied expectations means the planning assumptions were wrong. It means pre-war intelligence underestimated what Iran could reach and what it could damage. Now connect the sequence. Iran neutralized early warning radars in previous waves, then struck the Hyela satellite communications relay twice, then hit THAAD, tracking radars and comms infrastructure across the Gulf. Radars first, communications second, then heavy warheads arrive into a detection environment that can no longer coordinate the response. If the radar feeding your interceptor battery is offline, speed becomes irrelevant. You're not shooting at what you cannot acquire. Let me show you something that most analysts are deliberately ignoring. The Israeli Defense Forces held a press briefing on March 10th and disclosed something that reframes this entire conflict. Approximately 50% of all ballistic missiles launched by Iran since February 28th carried cluster bomb warheads, not conventional unitary warheads. Cluster munitions, weapons banned by over 100 countries because of their indiscriminate nature and the unexploded ordnance they leave behind for years. Iran is not a signatory to that convention. Neither is Israel. Neither is the United States. The IDF stated publicly that Iran has been firing cluster-armed missiles at Israel almost daily since the war started. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies confirmed this in an analysis published March 11th, noting that with Iran's launcher fleet being degraded by strikes, the shift to cluster warheads is a deliberate adaptation to extract maximum damage from each individual missile that gets through. This isn't desperation. This is tactical evolution under fire. Now here's the contradiction that holds this entire situation together, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. The White House claims 90% reduction in Iranian capability. The IDF reports 75% of operational launchers eliminated. Channel 11 shows declining launch rates day by day. And yet, the most devastating barrage of this entire war, Wave 37, 3 continuous hours of hypersonic and cluster-armed missiles, landed 4 days after those assessments were made public. Both realities cannot coexist. Either the intelligence was wrong, or the metrics being used to measure success are fundamentally disconnected from what's actually happening on the ground. Because, standing here today, March 12th, analyzing the satellite damage assessments, the casualty reports, the verified strike footage, I can tell you with certainty, Iran is not fighting the war Washington expected. And the gap between those two realities isn't a reporting error. It's the war itself. The cumulative toll, as of March 10th, 14 Israeli civilians killed, over 2,300 injured, more than 3,000 residents displaced by direct hits and falling interception debris. The deadliest single event remains the March 1st strike on Beit Shemesh, where an Iranian missile penetrated a communal bomb shelter beneath a synagogue, killing 9 people, including 3 teenage siblings. 2 interceptors had been fired at that missile. Both failed to destroy it. The shelter roof collapsed. On the Iranian side, the IDF confirmed striking regime headquarters in Tehran and Tabriz, targeting special forces compounds, IRGC facilities, ballistic missile coordination centers, and nuclear laboratories, some struck previously during the June 2025 12-day war. Israel says it has hit hundreds of military and government-linked targets since February 28th. Simultaneously, the United States destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the Strait of Hormuz in a preemptive operation. As intelligence indicated, Iran intended to deploy naval mines in the waterway where 20% of global oil transits. Major shipping firms suspended sailings. Hezbollah entered the war on March the 2nd, opening an additional front from Lebanon. The morning after Wave 37, IDF Home Front Command Chief Major General Rafi Milo addressed the country from northern Israel. His words, "More difficult days are expected. Schools remain closed. Gathering restrictions stayed in place." That is not the posture of a military that believes its adversary is spent. So here's my assessment, and I'm going to be blunt because this is what the data shows. Iran launched Wave 37 knowing it would be called propaganda. They fired cluster munitions knowing they'd be accused of war crimes. They hit American radar installations knowing it would trigger escalation. And they sustained 3 continuous hours of fire, knowing the White House had just declared them 90% degraded. Why? Because perception is a weapon, and right now, the perception gap between what officials are saying and what satellite imagery is showing is wider than at any point in this conflict. Both governments claim escalation dominance. Both governments promise victory is near. And yet neither side has defined what an acceptable end to this war actually looks like. That's not strategy. That's momentum. And momentum doesn't negotiate. It accelerates until something breaks. The question nobody in Washington, Tehran, or Jerusalem wants to answer. What breaks first? I've spent my entire career studying conflicts that spiral beyond their architect's control. This is one of them. Share this with everyone who still believes the official narrative. Hit subscribe if you want the truth that satellite imagery reveals, not the version scripted for press briefings. Drop your analysis in the comments. Which side is closer to breaking? And remember, in modern warfare, the side that controls the narrative often loses control of the battlefield. I'll see you in the next one. Because what I'm tracking for the next 72 hours will determine whether this war expands beyond containment or collapses into negotiation neither side can afford. The variables are already in motion, Oil shipments stalled at Hormuz, interceptor stockpiles draining faster than production, and a new Iranian weapon system that hasn't been publicly identified yet. I've seen the shadow in the satellite feeds. You'll see it soon too. Stay close.